Yes, we will record. So tonight, our first speaker is Gustav Larsson, who is a former planning commissioner, a former city councilman, and a former vice mayor. He's still involved in Sunnyvale, so we are honored. That's my question. Why are you still involved? But you can answer that during your presentation. He's going to talk about the Sunnyvale Charter ordinances, and I'm not positive. I'm going to just go off the top of my head. Is it an ordinance or is it amendments? And you can clarify that. And why we're doing this and how that process went. And furthermore, it's going to be on the ballot November 4th. Is that the election? Does anybody know? It's the 3rd. Okay. So November 3rd. So at the end of his presentation, we will take a vote to see if Livable Sunnyvale will endorse those ordinance amendments, and we will hopefully do them bulk, not each one. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here at Livable Sunnyvale. I really appreciated the advocacy that Livable Sunnyvale has done, like when I was on council, and all the thoughtful comments that you provided. So thank you for having me here. I have some slides to share. Am I able to share them? So sharing is not turned on. Okay, we have the technology. Do that. Awesome. Okay, let me. Okay. And there we go. Very good. Thank you. So I'll start with a disclaimer. I did not use AI to prepare these slides. That's why they look very plain. But yes, I proudly wrote these myself. So again, Gustav Larsson, in addition to, oh, I see a misspelling already. I call myself the Chard of the, or no, I called it the Chard Review Committee. I actually like that. We should have that. That's a good idea. We should have that in the city. So in addition to serving on council, I chaired the Charter Review Committee last year, which came up with these proposals. So let me start with a little bit of background. There we go. So for those who don't know, what is a city charter? It is the ground rules for city government, the decisions that are so important that only the voters can change them. So it's kind of like the Constitution. It sets out the outline of city government and really important points about how the city should be run. And I want to emphasize that this is a living document. Sunnyvale first adopted its charter in 1949. Since then, there have been 85 charter amendments placed on ballots at various times. Most of those have passed, 69 out of 85, not all, so it's not a given. But again, these are things that require voter approval and can only be changed by the voters. And how did we get here with these 3 items on the ballot? It was a public process, a very public process. There was a charter review committee consisting of 10 residents of Sunnyvale appointed by the council. We met throughout 2025. I have the names of the committee members on the board. It includes Tim Wee, who is on there, and you may recognize a number of other people. These are all great people who continue to be very engaged in the community, diverse range of views. And so as a committee, we got ideas from city council, from our own reading cover to cover of the charter, from resident input, city staff, brought it all together, had a number of public meetings, sifted it down to try to identify the most valuable recommendations to make out of there. We even conducted a community survey to get feedback from the community. We ended up with 5 recommendations to council to consider, and city council conducted a poll of residents, a formal poll, and then decided to place 3 of those items on the November ballot. So these are the 3 items that we considered to have the most impact on the city of what we considered. And so very briefly, the three topics are: one, public works contracting. The second one is the limit for the city manager to settle legal claims without going to council. And the third is filling city council vacancies. So I'll go through these one by one. Public works contracting, probably not the most exciting topic that people think about, but it actually makes a big difference for how the city is able to build things, construct things. And traditionally, this was done through a two-phase process. There would be one contract for design and a second contract for building. And the building was required to go to the lowest bidder. And that was the standard for many years. And over the last 20 years, the state has started to allow government agencies, cities, school districts, and others other options for how to handle contracts, specifically combining design and build into one contract, which actually adds a lot of flexibility. Because then you don't have to, if there's a change or a misunderstanding, you don't have to go to two parties and try to get them to talk to each other. You just say, we've got one contract, you go figure it out. It also, by combining them, it allows for more innovative designs. There are things like, if you've heard of mass timber construction, cross-laminated timber, where it's beautiful, like these big pieces of wood to frame the building that fit together so tightly you can't slide a credit card in there. And it looks fabulous, but it's a new construction technique in this area, and not many builders would know how to do it. So if the city wanted to do that, for example, there's no guarantee that we could actually find a builder for that second phase to actually do it. So most of the designers would not do a risky construction technique like that. So by this charter amendment would allow the city to use any option permitted by state law. We can still use the traditional method, or we can use these newer methods. More options is it's faster, it's cheaper, and more flexibility for the city. This is probably the highest direct value to the city and to the residents of all the items on here. School districts use this already and use it for the last few years and have used it very effectively. And this item had broad support. The next item, raising the cap for the city manager to settle legal claims. Again, something that most of us don't think about most of the time. Right now, the city manager can, on their own, settle legal claims up to $50,000. But that limit was set in 1989, and costs have gone up quite a bit. The only way we can increase that is to go to the voters. So that's what we're doing. Today, the city manager has the authority to approve other contracts up to $250,000. So the proposal is to let council set a cap that would initially be the same as the cap for legal claims to match the cap for contracts. There's still oversight. The claims have to stay within budget. City manager still has to report afterwards to council or provide information about what has been settled. But often when there's a claim, if it's clear that the city has some liability, it's just better for everyone to settle quickly before everyone gets lawyered up and the costs go up. And this is really, this speaks to the council's goal of a more responsive and efficient city government. And again, this had very, very broad support as well. There was a little bit of questioning about what should that dollar cap be, but that's something that council can, with this measure, council can adjust it in the future without going back to the voters. So again, that helps with the efficiency, and 10, 20 years from now, we can keep up with inflation. That brings me to the third ballot measure, filling council vacancies. And we've had some experience with this over the last few years. We have learned that special elections are extremely expensive, over $1 million, probably in the around 1.4 million for a citywide Sunnyvale election. So we did change the charter a few years ago to say that if council appoints someone to fill a vacancy, they can serve until either the next primary election or the next general election, whichever comes first. Well, the challenge with filling it in the March or June election is if that seat is already going to be filled in, say, November of that year, that's a short time. If that primary election is more expensive than the general, and it usually has lower turnout. So the Charter Review Committee felt that for all these reasons, it would be better for local democracy to actually fill these vacancies at November even year elections. And this is of the three, this is the measure that has more controversy around it. The counter argument is that sometimes democracy is expensive and it's a good investment. Given I think the committee wasn't swayed by that. Given both the cost of the election and then potentially the short time that someone would serve. So those are the three items and on the ballot, and I am happy to take questions on these. And we also have, again, Tim Wee, who is on the committee, who can answer questions as well. Okay, so ask to put them up one at a time. So public works contracting, or the cap for the city manager to settle legal claims, or filling council vacancies.
Go back to the first one. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Is that the first one?
Yeah, that's the first one.
Okay. The trouble with these things is they're really hard to explain. And so I'm afraid people will just vote no, but go to the second one. And are there that many legal claims that, that we need to have?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not a huge number. It varies year by year. But partly it's that they become more expensive to settle the longer it takes to settle them.
So apparently that didn't come up, how many legal claims there are?
It did come up, and the answer from staff was, it depends.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an evasive response.
Yeah, but it's probably, I'm going to just speculate here that it's probably less than 24 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 dozen. That's what, 2 a month. Okay. And then the third one was.
Third one, filling council
Oh,
vacancies.
okay. So let's say there's a general election. We have an election coming up this November for 3 council members, and then somebody quits, cancer, whatever, next February. So then does it go for that person is in there basically 2 years?
Potentially. Yeah.
They are, okay. And of course, there's no decision about how that person was selected. I mean, one of them, I remember the person had run, one of the appointments, the person had run, and then he was defeated in the next election. And then one of the council members left. And so that person who was defeated was put on for the temporary. I think it was when Otto Lee was sent off to wherever he was sent to. I don't know. Did anything come up about the mayor's salary? I mean,
Yes, and there was a separate proposal, a mayor's salary, and also to consider council salary. The polling, formal polling did not support putting that on the ballot. Yeah. I have an opinion on that one.
So do I. What is your opinion?
My opinion is that it is definitely worth paying more for our council members and our mayor to broaden the pool of people who are able to serve. And so that if, this is not meant to be like a career position, but enough so that if someone, say, loses their day job, they can afford to remain in Sunnyvale, serve on council while they also look for another position.
I went before the council when you guys were doing a presentation one time. I did a little research about the cities of our size who had directly elected mayors, and it kind of came out $1 per population. So in other words, we're 155,000, so the mayor should be paid 155,000, which is not very much. But I suppose they have expense accounts. I don't know. I also think the mayor should have a secretary. But no, this is a big city. What's wrong with us?
So there's a question in the chat that says, are settlements able to be checked on the Sunnyvale website?
I suspect not. I think sometimes these are confidential settlements. If it is public information, someone can make a public records request and get the information. But I suspect that many of these have some confidentiality around them. And that's true today. That would not be changed by this measure.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I guess my question is, the last time we did this was when?
The last time we reviewed the whole charter was probably 15 years ago.
So is there an intention to do this on a regular basis, or is this another 15 years out? We're
think,
good? Or?
I think it's kind of ad hoc. There's not a formal schedule of when it should be done. It's really up to council to say, yeah, we think now is a good time to do it.
In 2017, 18, there was a small review just for appointees. They revised that.
That's right.
Just very focused. And we, based on the learning from that, we actually went a little further and with more understanding of how the appointee should work. So we think we've solved that appointee challenge now. And from my perspective, I think that's what the appointee one was quite well done, because we want more people to choose. And the problem with these smaller elections is fewer people are voting. And we really want a large electorate to elect our council members. Oh, no. Actually, I'll just mention, as far as another charter review, there were two other issues that came up that in the future would be very interesting to deal with, in addition to the salary one. I think a lot of the committee members felt pretty strongly that we should compensate our council members better for their time, because it is a lot of work to be a council member, to do an effective job in mayor. There was one that didn't pass before around becoming gender neutral. And there was another one that's related to that, just to make the language more modern and understandable, and just take a gender out completely and do other such technical corrections to make it just very clean and simple, to correspond with some uniform contract law that currently is in place for a lot of contracts.
There's also one about how many times the council has to meet per year, because right now it's very rigid.
Yeah, and that was one of the five, or one that was one of the five that went to council, but one of the two that did not make it to the ballot. And I think part of the thinking there was, if that would go on the ballot at the same time as increasing council salaries, it could be portrayed as the council wants to get paid more and work less. And it didn't feel like that was the most that was more urgent than these other ones. These other ones seemed like they were a better return for the city.
Can you review with me how the city council and mayor are paid? When we put on the election to have a citywide mayor, I don't remember a separate change to the mayor's salary, but I think the mayor's salary was bumped up once we got a citywide mayor. And how are they paid now? Is it cost of living or?
Yeah. So it is adjusted annually based on CPI, cost of living, and there might be a like 5% cap on that. I'm not sure, but it's basically CPI. And I don't recall the mayor's salary being bumped up when we went to a directly elected mayor, but I could be wrong. I just don't remember. The mayor is paid more than council members. Council members, I think it's now like high 30,000s a year, 36, 38,000. It's when I was on council, it felt like on a good day, I could almost make minimum wage. Not quite. It was also interesting to put council salaries up against the affordable housing income brackets. That it's currently, council members are paid at the extremely low income level, and we were looking at bringing them up to the low income level. The mayor is, I think, 50% more than the council members.
So to clarify, the appointed mayor was already bumped up. So the directly elected mayor is probably paid the same.
That's right.
To your recollection. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Am I correct? The last election cycle was what, 2 years ago? There were some charter amendments that were lumped together and on the
Yes.
ballot, right, which were then rejected.
That's right.
So I think this commission was kind of gun shy about putting too many things on, and now these are three separate things that people vote on as well. So that if there's just one thing they don't like, they don't reject the entire all the measures.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me about that, because that was really front and center in the committee's thinking, was the lesson from that election. It's like, no, don't bundle them together. Let people choose one by one.
Another lesson was to have a charter review committee and to publicize it and get a lot of public feedback. That last time, it kind of came as a surprise to a lot of people. It happened quickly because the council members recommended those changes, and then they just sort of popped on the ballot, and people weren't given runway to figure out what does this really mean. And this time around was a very measured process in picking what's going on, this charter amendment.
The question is, will there be pro-con arguments on the ballot? I know that pro arguments are being written. We'll see if con arguments appear. And it's unclear whether there may or may not be organized opposition to one or more of these. Or organized support, exactly. Which could be important.
Going once, twice, any other questions? So we will take our vote, and we're counter to the ballot. We're going to lump all of ours together at Livable Sunnyvale. And I will mention to people in the room and online, this meeting is recorded. So I know we're a little bit early in starting our ballot study process, where we learn about what's going to be on the ballot, but you can go and watch this later and share it with your friends and neighbors. what's going to be on the ballot and where we stand and why we stand here. So I move that we accept all three, or move this, that we endorse this amendment, all three amendments. Is there a second? Second. And then I'm not positive. I believe most in the room, but maybe not all, have. So to vote in Livable Sunnyvale, you have to be an active member, meaning you have to attended 2 meetings in the past 6 months. So I think you guys are new, but I think most everybody else can vote, and we will just vote by, as Mike says, affirmation. So all in favor? And I guess I should be taking notes on who's voting. So, and I guess the question is, so let me see those. So Scott said yes. Mary Ann said yes. Julia is yes. Kevin. I think Lana, you're okay, but I'm not positive, but.
Manchu also
Oh,
gave
so-
a thumbs up.
Okay. This is very confusing for me. Where's Paulina when you need her? So, and anyone opposed, I guess. So you have to just like, nobody's opposing. So we passed this. So thank you very much, Gustav.
Thank you. Really appreciate your endorsement of these measures.
I will say that when I tried to Google you, there are many different spellings for your name, and there were not 2 S's. So I apologize on, I think all of our marketings had 1 S. I'm sorry.
I'm totally used to that. No issues
I mean, you're
whatsoever.
hard to find out there.
I keep a low profile.
Yeah, I thought I did, but, and I usually come up as my husband, but anyway. So thank you very much for your time and your continued commitment to Sunnyvale. Thank you. He's got to go, right? Okay. So I know our next topic is the, wait a second, is our inclusionary study issue. And I believe, Ryan Dyson, you are our frequent flyer. I think you have spoken more at Livable Sunnyvale than anyone I can remember, if you want to know the truth. So Ryan is the housing specialist, and he's been with Sunnyvale for a while. Wait a second. Oh, 10 years of experience to affordable housing, but I think you've been with Sunnyvale for how long?
Just 5 years with Sunnyvale.
Oh, just 5. Okay. And he's bringing with him Dina Belzer, and I believe she's one of the consultants with over 30 years experience. And as I read your stuff, Dina, where do you live? You've got projects and you work in North Dakota and California and Buffalo. Where do you live?
I'm at the corner of Shattuck and Ashby in Berkeley, South Berkeley.
Oh, okay. So you are local. So welcome.
Thank you.
And then Jake is also part of your team.
Yes.
And then Lorena is part of Ryan's team, and she's relatively new with the city of Sunnyvale.
Yes, she's been with the city for almost a year now.
Beautiful. Okay.
Mhm.
So welcome. And you're going to educate us on why we did this study issue, maybe how it came about. And Gustav just left, but when was it that Sunnyvale had their mandatory inclusionary of 15%? Maybe I'm going off topic. Okay. Anyway, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes. Let me.
Oh, yes, I see a button for that.
There you go. You should be good.
Is that working? Great. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Dyson, as Angela mentioned, housing specialist too with the city of Sunnyvale. And tonight I'm joined by Lorena Lopez, also housing specialist with City of Sunnyvale, Dina Belzer, and Jake Cummings, both with strategic economics. And we're going to be presenting on the city's inclusionary housing feasibility study and some findings related to that study. Uh, so, and I'll kick things off with an overview of the study, and then I'll hand things over to Jake and Dina for the technical aspects of the study. And then it'll go back to me to sum things up, and then we'll do a round of question and answer comments, and yeah. So some background on this study and the city's inclusionary housing policy. The city's had
Ryan, we don't see your slides yet.
Oh, geez. Is there a delay? Oh, is that working now?
Yes.
Great. Not sure what happened before, but it sounds like we're good now. So yes, so background for this study, the city's had an inclusionary housing policy since 1980. It's been modified several times since 1980. But based on our ongoing policy, we have 344 active BMR, which is what we call our inclusionary housing units. So we have 344 active, affordable, below market rental units in the city, and just over 500 active BMR ownership units in the city. The most recent updates to the city's inclusionary housing policy have been done in 2019, and that was for the rental program, which essentially reestablished it after it was paused in the mid-2000s. And to our ownership policy, we recently adjusted that in 2021, where we went from 12.5% of a requirement to a 15% requirement. The reason why we're here tonight, the reason why we did this study is based on a study issue, the City Council study issue that was brought to us in 2023 that asked us to consider increasing inclusionary housing requirements to 20%. And then also review and update the in lieu fees for rental and ownership housing. And this also connects to a housing element program, Program H5, which asked us to conduct a feasibility study. So in order to complete the study, we actually realized at the time, we're part of a collaborative of jurisdictions in Santa Clara County called the Santa Clara County Planning Collaborative. But we realized that other jurisdictions were doing similar studies that the city was about to do. So we decided it would be a good idea to band together and work on those studies together. We worked with our community planning collaborative to select a consultant for this study, and we selected Strategic Economics. So they're here tonight to handle the technical aspect of things. And you'll see on the slide here the other participating jurisdictions. Only those jurisdictions that are outlined in yellow, so Sunnyvale, Gilroy, Los Altos Hills, and City of Santa Clara are also participating in the inclusionary housing feasibility study portion of it. Some of the other jurisdictions have other components that are outside of this scope. As part of the study, Strategic and the city have done community and stakeholder engagement that has helped inform the study. That's included stakeholder meetings with real estate professionals, also with affordable housing advocates back in February of 2025. The public draft of the report was published last November, and several public draft meetings were held following that publication. Any comments that were received as part of that review were taken into consideration for the final report, which was published in March of this year. And in the meantime, staff has been working on taking this to council and to commissions. But our first stop is here with Livable Sunnyvale, where we want to get your input before we go to a study session next week with City Council. And then I will quickly describe the current inclusionary housing policy for everyone before I hand it over to Jake. But the city has two components of our inclusionary housing policy, one for rental and then one for ownership. So our rental policy applies to projects with 3 or more units, and it's a 15% requirement. And 5% of that requirement is for very low income units, and then 10% is for low income units. Projects may also pay an in lieu fee, although this must be approved by council. And the in lieu fee for smaller projects up to 6 units is $16 per square foot. And then for larger projects with 7 or more units, which are most projects that we see, it's $32 per square foot. On the ownership side, our requirement applies to projects with 7 or more units. And for those projects, 15% is required, and those are all moderate income units. And then the in lieu fee, which again must be approved by council, is 7% of contract sales price. So it's not a square foot basis. It is based on the sales price of the homes in those developments. And with that, I will, oh, sorry, gone backwards somehow. We'll hand it over to Jake.
Thanks, Ryan. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to pretty briefly just go over some high-level points from our approach to the study and some of the key high-level findings and results. Our goal with the study, the core of the study is to consider the affordable housing inclusionary policy in Sunnyvale. And so we test alternative policy scenarios for financial feasibility. How do various inclusionary policies affect the profitability of development? Now, that's the core of the study, and the outcome is essentially to recommend a set of in lieu fees and a set of policy options to the city. The in lieu fees aligned to the policy options. So that's the feasibility part of it. And it's important to remember when we talk about a feasibility study that it represents a moment in time. So we performed most of this study in 2025, as Ryan just explained. The data were collected in 2025. So the results reflect that, and market conditions change. So it's important to remember that. Most of the work has to do with financial feasibility. We also think it's important when we do these policy studies to bring in some other considerations along with the pure economics of various policy scenarios. And the other considerations include things like, what are the community's objectives? Again, Ryan already explained that the city is considering, elevating the inclusionary requirement on both rental and for sale projects. We look at what other cities are doing in Santa Clara County or peer cities. How would Sunnyvale's policy today or in the future compare to those other cities? And we also highlight some of the state laws and regional guidelines to consider when setting an inclusionary policy. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So I mentioned the state laws and guidelines. Here are some of them, or here are the key ones. Recently, within the last 10 years, there's been new legislation that allows HCD to scrutinize inclusionary policies that require a certain level on rental projects only. So this only applies to rental projects. But cities that do have a requirement that's greater than 15% on site for lower income households, so that's 80% of AMI or less. If you exceed that bar, you may come under additional scrutiny from HCD. Essentially what they're looking for is for cities to show that a higher level of inclusionary is feasible in that city. Conversely, MTC has a transit-oriented communities guidelines for station areas, for Caltrain station areas in Sunnyvale's case. And they reward policies that are at least 15%. So that's, 15% seems to be the sweet spot that many jurisdictions find in light of these factors. The last thing to just be aware of when considering, these mixed income housing developments and inclusionary policies is the state density bonus law. We can talk a little bit about this more during questions. I'll just highlight really briefly for those who aren't familiar. The state density bonus law allows developments to exceed the maximum zone density for a site. And so an important point here is that, any units that the developer provides to satisfy the inclusionary policy, the local inclusionary policy, can also be used to satisfy the criteria for a state density bonus. And there's a whole menu of options that depend, the amount of density, the amount of bonus units that you may be entitled to under the law, varies based on the amount and income levels for the various units. So when that happens, the developer is entitled to build additional market rate units above the zone density for that site. And so as a result, you may get projects that are at a higher density and that, the effective affordable percentage is something less than the city's requirement, which in this case is 15%. Go to the next slide. So the basic concept of the financial feasibility analysis, again, we're considering alternative policies and inclusion. And inclusionary policy impacts, obviously, a residential development's financials. A policy that requires on-site units requires a certain number of units to be held deed restricted at a below market rate. And that affects the revenues that developers can gain from the project. And conversely, when you charge fees, that increases their costs as opposed to the revenues. So when we, and the point I wanted to make about assessing feasibility is, if you could just go back just a second, Ryan, there's a point about the residual land value on the slide. So we assess feasibility with the concept of a residual land value. And that basically just means, we look at the potential revenues from a potential project. We look at the development costs for a potential project, the cost of building and designing the development. We factor in a market return for the developer needed to attract investment for the project. The remainder is what we call the residual land value, and that's the most that the development could pay for the land for their development. So when residual land value gets squeezed and goes too low, that's an infeasible project. If it goes lower than what the going rate of land is in Sunnyvale, that's probably an infeasible project. If it goes negative, that's definitely an infeasible project. You can't have a zero land value. So I'll talk a little bit about the residual land value as I go through the results. Okay, you can go to the next slide. When we do the feasibility analysis, I said we test policy scenarios. We test the scenarios on what we call building prototypes. And these are typical example residential developments that might be subject to an inclusionary policy. We have 2 ownership prototypes and 3 rentals. The ownership prototypes include one condominium development that would have condominium flats over a podium, over podium parking. The townhome development is, attached single family at about 20 units an acre, which is typical of the area. The rental prototypes include different scales for apartments. The small scale is, a 3-story building with tuck under parking, less expensive to build, but much lower density than a 5-story, which would have a concrete podium similar to the condominium. In this case, there's actually a subterranean level as well to the parking, as well as units above that parking podium. The 8-story rental is a sort of a different construction type altogether, also with a parking podium and additional units above that parking podium up to 8 stories. This prototype includes ground floor retail, again, because that's typical of the area. So that's sort of the setup to our approach. I'm going to go through some of the high-level results. I'll talk about the rental first. We tested the financial feasibility of raising the inclusionary policy to 20%. We test the result against what it might be for just a market rate project with no requirement, and we look at sort of the difference in how residual land value changes. Well, you can see in the chart there, that dark blue bar represents the all market rate unit scenario for each of the building prototypes, and then the light blue bar is with the policy applied. So the value goes down when you apply the policy. In this case, we're already starting, for the two of the prototypes, we're already starting from a negative residual land value. So we're already infeasible, before we apply the inclusionary policy. That thin red line represents sort of typical land values, or the hurdle that you would have to meet to be a feasible project. So again, these are a snapshot in time. Multifamily development was really struggling, especially after the pandemic. And at the time we collected data, there was not a whole lot of activity, and then not a whole lot of investment in multifamily development. That may be changing. But at least for at the time that we looked at the study, the rental prototypes were not feasible, although the 8-story did perform best because it's the highest density prototype. The ownership prototype's a little bit different story. All through Silicon Valley and the Peninsula, townhomes are performing very well. You can charge a lot for a townhome. As a result, townhome development is fairly active and feasible. So, this is the similar chart to what you saw before. The dark blue line shows, or the dark blue bar shows, the residual land value of an all market rate project, which exceeds the land cost of the city. So that's feasible. When you apply that 20% on the townhome, you fall, just under what we've considered to be the typical land costs in Sunnyvale. So we're calling that marginally infeasible, but really, land costs can vary to a degree that you're pretty close to feasible with that policy. So the townhome could probably accommodate the 20% requirement. We'll look at some market scenarios on the next slide. For the condo development is seldom occurs. It's not a common development in the Bay Area right now. It does occur, but it's much more difficult to make work in most instances. And so that already started from a negative position in our feasibility study. Go to the next slide. So just a little bit to drill down a little bit on the townhomes. We performed the market scenarios for all of our prototypes, but just to show you how things might change for the townhome, because that's, marginally infeasible according to our analysis. We tested different market scenarios showing, a price drop of 10% in the future, price increase of 10%, price increase of 20% on townhomes. So you see, a slight change, slight improvement in the market would enable a 20% policy. You see that purple bar is the 20% scenario. So it exceeds the typical land cost. The residual land value for that scenario exceeds the typical land cost with a modest increase in values. So that considering sort of the range of developments that occur, I mean, it's important to keep in mind that all developments are different, so they all have slightly different economics. So you will get feasible townhomes with that 20% requirement. As I mentioned, we also considered what we call peer city policies, essentially, other policies that you see in jurisdictions in Santa Clara County. 15% inclusionary. I know there's a lot of information here, so let me just kind of highlight the main points. But 15% inclusionary is fairly standard. Los Gatos has like somewhat unique inclusionary policy where it sort of phases in from 10% all the way up to 20% for very large projects. But again, it sort of centers around that 15% guideline. Mountain View is a little bit different in that they do have a 15% policy. They do have an additional requirement on townhomes specifically that you have to meet the 15% moderate income for a townhome project, but you also have to offer another 10% for an above moderate income at 135% of AMI in that city. Palo Alto is, fairly in line with everybody else. They have, I think, a 20% for the larger sites. But essentially, the 15% is generally where most of the jurisdictions land in Santa Clara County. Next slide. So I mentioned the testing policy scenarios. We also quantify in lieu fees. So cities that do want to charge fees in the place of, or offer a fee option in place of requiring on-site units, what we do is calculate what the equivalent fee would be to offering the on-site units associated with a policy. So it's essentially the revenue foregone by offering affordable units. We convert that into a dollar figure and divide by the square feet in our prototypes to get an assessment of what an equivalent fee would be for each policy. For the rental policy, the current fee is $33, probably based on a study that was performed under very different market conditions. That amount has risen significantly for the different. We calculate the equivalent fee for each of the prototypes. We'd recommend a single in lieu fee for rentals that's sort of tied to the most common types of rental developments. So some combination of the 5 and 8 story, perhaps an average. So that's rental. If you go on to here's a comparison of the rental fees to other jurisdictions. Again, I think most other jurisdictions did set their in lieu fees based on an economic study that occurred under different market conditions, probably 5 or 6 years ago or before. So they tend to be in the 30s. Mountain View has a higher fee effective this month at $98. So that, a fee in the 90s is not totally out of range. And, Santa Clara was another, as Ryan explained, Santa Clara was another study that participated in this, or another city that participated in this study. And they're looking at increasing their fees in line with our findings as well. Go to the next slide. On the ownership side, again, we calculate the current fee equivalent in Sunnyvale. Sunnyvale calculates their ownership fees a little bit differently than most jurisdictions, but the equivalent fee for our prototypes would be $69 or $70 per square foot. With applying the updated market assumptions, those would go to a higher fee, assuming a 15% requirement, and an even higher fee if assuming a 20% requirement. Again, it's important to remember that I think that Sunnyvale's priority is to get the on-site units. So the payment of the fees would be sort of the exception as opposed to the rule. So these only apply in special circumstances. Again, in a comparison of the ownership fees, Sunnyvale just currently charges 7% of the contract sales price, so it doesn't charge a per square foot fee. Most cities do charge based on a per square footage amount. Mountain View recently raised their fees in line with, in the same range as we just talked about, as we found in our study. And some of these other cities that do have lower fees based on past studies. And I think that wraps up our part. I'll hand it back to Ryan for kind of a summary and close out.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And I'll just close it out with a quick summary. So based on the results of the study, the findings in general are that the current market conditions do not support an increase of rental or condo requirements above 15%. And recall that HCD can review a ordinance that does go above 15% for rental requirements. However, we do find that with the townhome requirement, a 20% inclusionary policy could be supported based on the feasibility study. We also find that the rental in lieu fee could be raised to match the cost of providing the on-site units. And like Jake mentioned, the goal is to provide those units on-site. So that's always the city's number one goal. So the fee is typically something that we'll receive in a fractional amount, or it's something that must be approved by council as an alternative method of compliance. And then finally, the ownership in lieu fee could be converted from its current percentage of sales price methodology to a square footage based fee that would align more with the cost of providing those on-site units as well. So those were the main findings of the study. And the next steps for this is for this whole project is that we're going to City Council study session next week, next Tuesday. And that'll be at 5:30. So we'll be going from 5:30 to 7 to discuss this and get council's feedback, get public feedback on the results of the study. Based on what we hear, the feedback that we hear at that August 11th meeting, we'll be going back to the Planning Commission, Housing and Human Services Commission in October, and then finally back to council with our final recommendations in November. Yeah, we definitely, if you can attend any of those meetings, you're welcome to provide your input at them. I know we have some members of some of those commissions on the call tonight, but yeah, want to definitely alert you of those upcoming meetings and then just open it up now to questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I know there was a question earlier in the chat that said, should Sunnyvale be comparing to peer cities? None of them are really shining examples of development. I don't know if that's a question or just a comment. I'll just let that go. Okay, Gail has a question. She's next. And then Scott. So Gail, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was way over my head on slide 14 and 15. If you lost me there. If you could go back to those slides and maybe, I don't understand the blue lines, and I don't understand this residual land value. So if you could go over that, would be great.
Yeah.
So it's 14 and 15.
Yeah, let me just kind of review the concept of the residual land value, because it's, if you're not knee deep in real estate economics all the time, it can be sometimes a hard concept to grasp. But we assess feasibility with residual land value. So we look at the revenue potential of a development, in this case a prototype, right? And we look at what the cost to build it is. We consider the developer return. What's left over is what we call the residual land value. So, in some cases, as you see here, it costs more to build a building than you can get from revenues. When that happens, your residual land value is less than zero, which is most of these bars, right? Now, the dark blue bar represents, okay, well, what if you built the building and you had no inclusionary requirement at all? You could just do all market rate units and collect market rate rents on all of them. Even if you did that, under these conditions, it still costs you more to build the building than you could get in revenues. That's what the market rate, the all market rate scenario. That's the dark blue bar. The light blue bar is, okay, now let's apply that 20% policy on top of that, and now we're restricting rents for a portion of the units. In this case, for 20% of the units. That's going to cause a decline in revenues. It's going to cause a decline in feasibility, which is what the residual land value number shows. Does that kind of clarify things?
Maybe let me just chime in here to say that the other costs that go into the development, the cost of the goods, the cost of labor, the cost of the developer's return are all fixed across the market. So you more or less pay the same thing for those wherever. But the land costs are negotiated individually with individual land owners. So that's why this is the kind of in the equation. We're solving for everything. We're putting everything else into the stack, We're looking at how it stacks up against the revenue. And then whatever is left over at the end in our revenues, we call residual land value because that's the amount we can afford to pay for land after we've paid for everything else. And this red bar or box that you see on this chart shows what land would cost typically in Sunnyvale, right, Jake? That's the idea
Correct,
on a
yeah.
per unit basis. That's what the land cost is. So that's what that box is above the line, and then that is zero. And so you for the small scale rental apartments, you'd expect to pay about $150,000 per unit for land. And the fact that those bars are going down less than zero, that's showing that you're already in the red, just paying for the cost of construction, the hard costs, the developer return, etc. And that once you add the land cost in, you're really in the red. Is that helpful?
So that's with, I'm not, what I don't understand is that's with or without the inclusionary housing?
The blue is without, the dark blue is without, correct, Jake? And the light blue is with.
That's right.
Then
Yeah.
why are people building if you're saying they're underwater?
Well, first of all, a lot of people aren't starting new projects now. The projects that are under construction, the developers have, in some cases, already signed contracts with contractors, and committed on purchasing materials at a price they thought they could afford. And sometimes developers are building projects because they've just, already committed or they're already partway under construction, but they're losing money. We know of several development projects like that where the developers are building them, but they're losing money and they're hoping they'll make up the money later when rents increase. So that's one reason. Every development project, as Jake said earlier, is different. And so it's hard to generalize.
Okay, could you go over slide 15 as well? And thank you very much for being patient.
Absolutely. These are great questions. So here the bars are going up, not down, relative to that line that is zero. But these are for the ownership, and the two bars on the left are for the townhouses. And as Jake said, the townhouses are selling at the highest prices, and townhouses also have relatively low construction costs as compared to the construction costs for the 5-story condos. So the revenue versus costs allows you to pay more for the land. And so under the market conditions with all market rates, so with no inclusionary units, the developer is making well above their profit margin that they're looking for, well above the return that they're looking for. And when you add in the 20% inclusionary requirement, they're just below that red line, which is, kind of about what the average is for land for condos. Whereas for the 5-story condo, which is a much more expensive building type to build, much higher costs, you see that this one too is in the red, essentially. It's less than zero. Same thing, the dark blue is without any inclusionary policy, and the light blue is with the 20%.
I hope I'm not the only one that was lost, but thank you.
No, everybody, it's really common to be lost on these things. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Scott.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It almost strikes me that there should, and this is maybe to Ryan, that there ought to be a boilerplate here that very little housing makes any sense whatsoever right now. And I think, Jake, you would say under current conditions, and each project is different. But I think the net of this is almost, why do we see very little housing being built? Why don't we see enough below market rate housing being built? Why don't we see enough housing being built? This analysis says that other than townhomes for sale, nothing makes sense. And that the inclusionary policy makes it worse. Is that about right?
Well, I think, yeah, it's showing the current market conditions are not favorable for the development of housing. Like Dina mentioned and Jake mentioned, individual projects may have their own circumstances that make those projects work. Someone may have been holding on to the land for some time, purchased it at a different price. Just as an example, that can make a project work.
Sure,
Um,
everything's different. But I
Everything
mean,
is different.
to me, I found this. I saw this study when it was first introduced in March, and to me, it was just a big eye opener that it explains why we see so many townhomes being built and so little of everything else.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the current emphasis on townhomes that we definitely have experienced.
Just one other question, Ryan. Do you did you follow what it's not a peer city, but the city of San Francisco just reduced for many projects the inclusionary percentage down to 5% to try to spur more development. Have you seen that?
Yes, I am aware of their change to the inclusionary requirement, and yeah, I think that as a city they are much more flexible in their requirement. They have gone both well below our current requirement and then well above it. So they do seem to respond to different market conditions in a much more, I just I would say exaggerated fashion than we have been doing.
Thank you.
Julia.
Can you go back to the slide, the summary slide with the like 5 bullet points? Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, thank you. So I don't know if I got the logic correctly, but since we want them to build the inclusionary housing, and if they're using lieu fee, then they don't build the low income, the BMR housing. So in that line that says rental in lieu fee could be raised to match cost of providing on-site units. Shouldn't that be above costs of providing on-site units?
Well, we don't want to create an in lieu fee that would be infeasible, but we do want to encourage developers to provide those units on site. So we can stick with generally what would be the matching cost of providing those units on site.
So how are you incentivizing them to build rather than do the in lieu fee?
Well, in this case, uh, the fee being the same as costing those or as providing the units on site would be an incentive to just build them on site. Otherwise, there would still be the requirement to have council approval for any sort of in lieu fee, which is a process that most developers don't want to have to do for their projects.
Sorry, I missed the point. How are you encouraging them to build rather than pay the in lieu fee and get out of that requirement?
Right. We want to strike a balance between the fee being something that doesn't make a project infeasible, but also encouraging developers to provide the units on site. So we think that the match is the best way to go with that. But there's the additional requirement. Anytime a developer even considers paying an in lieu fee, that still needs to go to council for approval. And that's a process that most developers don't want to have to take into consideration for their projects.
The incentive is in the process, not in the way the fee is being set, if that makes sense.
So that's assuming that our council is a pro-housing council, right? Pro inclusionary housing council, correct?
Right.
So I don't understand this logic. I mean, yes, you're scaring them away by them not having to go through this, maybe odious process. But I mean, to me, it's kind of straightforward that if you just make the in lieu fee higher, you solve, you already prevent them from going that way. That's all, just a comment.
So
Fair
there
enough.
are also a couple comments in the chat. How do or does changing to building construction's costs affect these results? So I think you said they're the same across. What if that cost was lower, maybe? And then along those lines, the market condition is as if a developer makes a profit, right? If a state had an engineering core for developing homes, would this make housing easier to build?
On the question about changing construction cost, you know, we do sort of these sensitivity analyses all the time where we look at changes in some of these assumptions, and we've showed one, but in this presentation we've shown the change in the price assumptions in one of the slides. What happens if prices change? You could pretty easily imagine it's a very similar analysis to look at what happens if your costs go up by 10 versus minus 10%. It's a similar kind of sensitivity analysis. We didn't perform that specific one for this study. We usually like to look at price because that's sort of the most, that's the thing that sort of tends to be more variable. But it's, you can look at the cost side and it'll be a similar result.
I think there's some questions in the room. Doug?
So I just wanted to understand, you talked about current market conditions, and I just wanted to understand kind of what was factoring into that. So is that the cost of land, building costs, and also the price that a developer could expect to get per unit? What other kinds of things would be included in those market conditions and where you would look for potential changes?
Yeah, and we collected most of this data in 2025, so it sort of represents a 2025 picture. Beyond what you mentioned, another big one is sort of the interest rate environment, or the capital markets in general. So in certain times, developers are much more if they perceive a higher degree of risk or if interest rates are higher, it's a lot harder to get financing for your project. And especially compared to the past where we used to live in an environment of relatively low interest rates and rental development was considered very low risk in the Bay Area. You had very favorable conditions. That all sort of changed about 5 years ago, and interest rates increased. The perceived risk of developments increased. So that's another factor that gets taken into account.
Interestingly enough, tariffs have also had a big effect on construction costs.
Hi there. My name's Carter, who I'm speaking from inside the room. I was just wondering, what does feasibility mean for developers? And because this was a comment, well, this was a sort of, one of the bullet points in the slides. We were talking about the feasibility of different projects and what made sense. And we were talking about marginally feasible or marginally infeasible projects. And what I was just trying to get a better understanding of is how often do developers build these projects that are right on the margins, right? When I think about myself in terms of, when you look at an investment, if you're going to undertake something, you're usually wanting a pretty guaranteed profit margin before you even undertake something. And, I want to make sure that I'm prefacing my comment by saying, I'm not very pro developer in general, but I am just wondering, right? And I think the study explains it, right? Why don't we see anything other than townhomes? And how do we, and what I'm going to build towards next is how do we, are there other types of development that weren't looked at in this study that would make different types of housing feasible? So I'm going to go back to my first question and let you answer that. So how often do developers build marginally feasible or, marginally unfeasible buildings? If you could comment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna answer your question a little bit different way. I mean, the reason we call it marginally unfeasible is because it's less about, you know, there's always sort of a line where it's like go or no go, right? I mean, it has to be some line somewhere. The reason why it's a little bit fuzzy is because, as Dina explained, the cost of land is really, it varies a lot. It's really an outcome of what can be developed on it. Um, so we're showing you a typical land cost for Sunnyvale, but it depends on where you are in the city. It might depend on, the landowner's objectives, or how it's kind of the base value of the land, the locational values. So it could vary out based on a lot of things. So we show typical land costs as a guide, but if you come in a little bit under the typical land costs, it's not to say that your project is infeasible. It could be feasible in another location or under certain conditions, because land cost is so variable, and it's an outcome of all these other factors.
Right. So I think what I'm saying is, given that land cost, you don't know what land cost is going into it, right? I mean, before you've literally put pen and paper and you've bought the land, right? It could go up or down one day to the next, but there's different types of development that you can and can't do on these. And so if you look at the menu of options that are available in Sunnyvale, it seems to me as a developer that there's never a case where I'd choose willingly to not build townhomes because, all else being equal, if I'm paying for this land anyway, I'm most likely able to, I mean, based on the study and the findings, to make a healthier profit doing townhomes. And what I'm trying to understand is what are the different types of development like that weren't studied that could potentially, be advantageous for developers to build that would also help move the needle in getting more units built in the city of Sunnyvale and these other cities that participated in this study.
Well, I want to emphasize the fact that, our building prototypes, our several building prototypes were the most representative prototypes. So, we look at, development activity that occurs around the county, and in Sunnyvale, and we designate sort of the most typical development type, particularly, the multifamily developments. Based on the construction type, the 8-story tends to be a very efficient building. So that's sort of if you're going to make a profit, that 8-story building is kind of a sweet spot where you could maximize profit in most circumstances. And the 5-story has similar advantages as well. So that's why we chose those types of developments. So it's less about finding that, a specific purple squirrel development that might work. And, it's more looking at, here's a range of development densities at fairly typical, fairly efficient approaches to development. If the representative ones don't perform well under current market conditions, it's probably going to favor townhomes, given that they perform best.
Yeah. Sorry, if you could just go back then really fast to the summary of or findings where we had the graphs, because I was under the impression looking at those that basically nothing was feasible except for townhomes. Even 8-story wasn't feasible. So I'm curious why we're saying 8-story is now feasible.
Well, it's not feasible, but it does perform the best. And so, these conditions can change rapidly. So today it's townhomes, but there will be circumstances in the future where, as rents increase, and construction costs stabilize, that the 8-story will be the highest and best use in many locations. It is more of a station area urban development, so it's not going to work everywhere. But in a city like Sunnyvale, you might get those higher density developments once conditions change. So, I think another important point to emphasize is that, we test this as a point in time, but we kind of want to, advise cities to adopt a policy in anticipation of the future. And, as market conditions change, I mean, we wouldn't recommend increasing the inclusionary policy now on rentals, but in the future, the current policy could be feasible. You'll see these larger development types occur.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that kind of clarify things?
This is Mike Cerrone. Well, this is very illuminating, as Scott said. The fact that almost nothing except townhomes is economically feasible explains why, over recent years, the legislature has literally passed hundreds of bills an attempt to increase housing starts, and we see almost no increase in housing starts as a result of that. And they keep passing more and more bills disabling local authorities from having any impact on housing and residents from having any impact. And it hasn't had much effect. And this would indicate it's because the projects are largely just not feasible. It's not that they're being blocked by local authorities. It's the cost of building. So a couple questions. How long do these below market
for rental and ownership? Rental units are affordable for 55 years, and ownership units are affordable for 30 years.
Yeah, that seems like a really long time. I'm surprised that wasn't looked at as a variable. What if, instead of 55 years, it was 30 years that they had to maintain, because they're subsidizing the units through this whole period of time, right?
Mhm.
And when you run something out for 55 years, it is a lot of money. So it seems like that would be a factor. Or if the subsidy rolled off over time. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good idea or not, but it seems like that would have a huge impact on penciling out. Of course, if market rate is not feasible, it won't help. But you mentioned ground floor retail in the models. I don't know who's building ground floor retail. I wish they were, but we don't see it anywhere. The ownership, the uh, uh, inclusionary requirement for ownership is for market rate, and rental it's for low and below, income. So the inclusionary requirement, the subsidy required for rental is much more severe than it is for ownership, which may also help to explain why we see so many ownership units compared to rental. If that's our policy that we don't want to build rental units, and that's fine, but at planning commission, uh, 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 some developers have these, particularly it says ownership versus rental. It says there been is that unique to Sunnyvale, the difference between the ownership and the rental?
Yeah, could I add a little context to that point? So you do see lower income requirements usually for the rental, and the reason that is because that the discount that they're getting is usually from, currently market rate rents are pretty close to 100, 120% AMI. I forget what the number is exactly, but it's already in the moderate range. So you're looking at a discount from that, essentially a moderate rent to the low and the very low. For the townhome, you're looking at, I mean, I think, and again, I don't know what the number is. I think it's, maybe 140%, market rate townhome might be 140%, 150% or higher of AMI. So the discount you're giving for a moderate income unit actually might be quite large. So those are some of the variations between those two types of policies, and that's why you see that with rental units, you're targeting a lower income uh, household in general with rental units usually.
If market rate rentals move up and down, do the limit down with them? Because those are tied to income, right? Not rentals.
The income limits for both the rental and ownership are based off of HCD's annual determinations for household income. So Those generally increase every year.
Right,
but they
if
get locked in,
rents,
the thresholds get locked in with the project, though.
Right.
They don't go up and down annually once the project is built.
Yeah.
so if rents in a particular city or whatever, for some other reason, drop by 20%, the BMR units still maintain the same rental. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
It's interesting. Does you show the difference between townhomes and condos? Is the condo liability laws, is that playing a role there?
It is playing a role, and it does increase some of the costs associated with some developers are building condos and buying additional insurance to protect themselves against those types of liabilities. So that is part of the reason. It's actually a relatively minor reason in this particular analysis, but that's a big reason in general why condo development is dampened in California. Yeah.
So that's something that could be addressed by law if we wanted to see more condos. And if your income changes, these are kind of narrow ranges. So if your income range changes, then you have to move out of the subsidized housing you're in, or even if you bought a subsidized unit, you have to move out of it, right?
We manage our BMR program in-house, and so we do annually certify participants. For the rental projects, if you're over income, then you would you could stay in the unit, but the next available unit would have to be offered to a lower, very low income household. On the ownership side, that doesn't change. If your income increases on the ownership side, we wouldn't require you to sell your unit.
Good. And I'll just mention the in lieu fee is not a get out of jail free deal. That's how we build like these mid-pen projects, the 100% affordable projects, right? I mean, that does go to housing.
Yeah, that's one component of our housing mitigation fund. The bulk of the housing mitigation fund comes from non-residential housing impact fees. So the development of new office commercial spaces.
Interesting. Okay, great. Thanks.
I know you guys have a stop at 8, and I'll just read this one comment from the chat. When was this report made, and how often are these costs updated? Market rates change frequently, costs, but approximate price of the units also differ by county and city. I don't know if you want to comment on that. This report was started in December, maybe?
It was completed over the course of 2025. Yeah, and because we participated with other jurisdictions, that doesn't mean we use the same data as Santa Clara necessarily. It was specific to Sunnyvale.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Just along the same line, sorry, just a quick question. Thanks for asking my question. Appreciate it, Ryan and Jake. Just a question in terms of how these costs were derived and what types of figures you use to drive these costs. I don't know if you talked about it earlier. It'd be interesting to kind of determine what the profit margins are that you're kind of assuming here. That would be also good to see.
Yeah, we develop our assumptions from a variety of sources. For the costs, the most significant source of cost information is we interview developers directly. So we talk about costs at our stakeholder meetings, and Brian talked about that a little bit. So we designate our building prototypes at the stakeholder meetings or with the help of the stakeholder meetings, and then we interview them one-on-one to ask them about costs. And most developers are relatively forthcoming about what it costs to do development, as well as what return expectations they have to meet in order for development to pencil.
So could I ask?
Right, but I mean, are you getting like a smattering of these? Like, how many do you do? I guess. I mean, I guess maybe you'll talk about it at the council meeting, right? For us to know whether this is representative of cost or margin, specifically when you make these assumptions or when you make these conclusions, I should say.
Uh, well, we did. I can't. I don't remember the number exactly, but for this study, we did at least 12 or 15 developer interviews. But we also we can also sort of reality check those numbers against, we do these types of studies a lot. So we're not starting fresh each time. So we take the information that we hear and put it in the context of what we know about development costs in the past and what we know about how costs have changed based on various factors in the past. There's other sources of market data. There's sources of market reports that tell us what types of income producing developments are, how they're transacting, and their values, and that we translate into our assumptions for this study.
Okay, thank you.
So I know you guys have a 8 o'clock stop, so I appreciate your time and your flexibility for moving around the agenda. I guess we will bring our other burning questions to council and it was very informative. It was very technical, and thank you for being patient with us. It's a tough topic, so thank you very much, and maybe we will see you Tuesday.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
See
Good
you
night.
next week.
Bye.
So we changed our agenda for several reasons, but we are now at the point where I need to, actually, I'm going to ask Ryan to stop sharing his screen, and I'm going to just let you know that we sent several letters out this past couple of months, and I don't have them queued up right now, but there were 3 letters. One was on transit, advocating for the transit bill that is going to be on the ballot. Another one was 295 South Matilda. That was a project that we have endorsed, and they went before planning. And then the final letter that we sent out was, what was it on? It was, okay, it was Santa Clara City Council in support of the Lawrence Benton project, which was a project for interim housing that has been in the works for probably 3 years now. So we sent those were the letters this month. You have links to them on your email. If you did not get them or you want to see them, you can email me. And there was a question I got about some of our letters that we send out. And one of them was, how come we don't send letters about market rate housing? And in fact, we do. We have an endorsement process. And over my tenure, I know we sent out a letter in support of the Fremont Sunnyvale Saratoga project. That's the one by Jake's Pizza. We endorsed that project. We also endorsed a project at Fremont and Mary, which is yet to break ground. We endorsed a project where the Wendy's is, another one that has yet to break ground. And I believe we did one on Sonora Court, which did break ground. So we do endorse market rate housing. And it was interesting to learn why we're only seeing townhouses. We knew we were only seeing townhouses, but now we know the why. I think maybe as Livable Sunnyvale, maybe we should look into, do we decrease inclusionary housing? Maybe. Or maybe some of the 55 years for rentals and 35 years. Those were interesting things to think about. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But anyway, we do have some announcements, and Mike Serene was going to help us out with some of those announcements.
So we have at least a couple people from the Las Palmas Park, Las Palmas Green and Serene. I see Manny and Paula on. So if you guys want to go ahead, do you have anything you want to share?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. No, I actually don't have anything to
Okay,
share. I just had a little public service announcement, I guess,
sure,
is what you
sure.
can call it.
Great.
So again, my name is Manny Guerrero. I represent Las Palmas Park Green and Serene, and our group has, Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're up to like 1,400 members now.
Mhm.
And so before I get too deep into things, I just wanted to say thank you again, Mike, for having us speak today. Um, as many of you may have already seen all the park signs out there for Las Palmas Park, and you may have wondered, why does our park need saving? Well, back in March, the Las Palmas Park community was blindsided by a plan to place tall field lights and a 20-foot fence surrounding about 80% of the open space field in the park. This was despite the fact that the community repeatedly did not prioritize lighting and fencing for the park in previous surveys. So how did lighting and fencing all of a sudden come up as a top priority for Las Palmas? Well, it turns out that back in 2024, the city performed a sports facilities needs assessment, and Las Palmas Park was considered a prime location for adult cricket. So this assessment also included a survey that the city is, I think, currently still considering as a data point to guide renovation funds for parks all around the city. So what's highly concerning about that survey was that it was open to all people, even those living outside of Sunnyvale, and individuals could vote multiple times. And of course, as human nature would have it, the Northern California Cricket Association urged their members on Facebook to take part in our city survey, going as far as telling members to urge their friends and family to vote on our city park renovation. If you've been to Las Palmas Park, and I'm sure many of you have, you know that our park is flanked by homes on multiple sides. And so cricket balls flying in multiple directions could potentially cause significant injury and damage to property. And so this is how fencing and lighting came about as a priority for our park. We ask, how can the city use a survey that is not transparent in terms of who the survey respondents are and how many people actually responded actually do exist? I mean, I would say that the possible inflation of the survey is a form of disenfranchisement of our residents. Again, what is the big deal about fencing? Well, if you've been to Las Palmas Park, you know that our park is well utilized by multiple sports groups. On any given day, you'll see volleyball players playing alongside youth soccer, youth softball, and even recreational cricket. And so it's a pretty busy, bustling park, sometimes even tough to find parking. So Livable Sunnyvale, I think you would call this sports inclusion. And I think this is a value that you hold dear to your organization. Well, fencing would destroy that spontaneous, natural sports ecosystem that we have at Las Palmas Park by ushering in a field rental system that would favor the use by organized sports. So does it make sense that you would have to pay a fee to use a field that was previously free for everybody? I don't think so. Our cost of living here is already high. We were just talking about high density living. People are losing yards, and our park is a place for people to go to have some green space. So let me remind you, we've already kind of made this mistake before as a city by having Lifetime Tennis run our Sunnyvale Tennis Center. And just like Mike, I play a lot of pickleball, and it still irks me when I have to pay every time I use those courts that our city pays the maintenance for. So we are hopeful. We see some light at the end of the tunnel. The city has decided to restart the Las Palmas Park renovation planning, but the process for engaging residents and interested parties is still not concrete. If you're interested in getting updates, there is a website that the city has. It's really long. I'm not going to read it out to you, but you can sign up to get updates on the park renovation. So in closing, this is not just about our park at Las Palmas. This is about all parks in Sunnyvale to make sure that all residents are heard and that these parks that we have that are so important as a resource for our children and just for getting out of our tight urban space. We need to be heard so that it's used in the right way for everybody. And this is also about transparency in our government and also fiscal responsibility. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Manny and Paula.
Mike, so if I could have just a few minutes to talk
Sure.
about our upcoming neighborhood, our new neighborhood association. And
Sure.
I just sent you a few slides. So just wanted to introduce our newest neighborhood association to the Sunnyvale a group of neighborhood associations. We're the 29th neighborhood association. We are officially called Las Palmas Park Neighborhood Association. We represent roughly 550 homes around the surrounding Las Palmas Park area. So our borders are on Hollenbeck to Remington to Sunnyvale, Saratoga, and then back to Hollenbeck. So we were formed 2 weeks ago. Um, and it was really our neighborhood association was an outshoot of our Las Palmas Green and Serene. When we started our community activism with Green and Serene, that's when we realized there was no neighborhood association representing the immediate neighborhood. So a few of us got together. We decided to form the neighborhood association. Our plan is to have our first kickoff meeting on October 3rd from 3 to 5 p.m. in Las Palmas Park. So if you want to save the date, we'll have it at the community center. And our intentions and goals of having this neighborhood association is really to strengthen connections among our neighbors. I've lived in Las Palmas Park for over 20 years, and I'm just getting to meet folks who live down my street. We want to represent the interests of the neighborhood, and we believe if we come together, we can have a strong voice and collaborate with the city government. To Manny's earlier point, we want to make sure we communicate openly and transparently. So that's one of our key core values. And finally, we've really been happy with the involvement in Las Palmas, the Las Palmas renovations, but we want to continue and go beyond that and address other, issues that are dear to the community. So, we're hoping that we'll continue for years and not only address issues, but build a stronger community. For those of you who live in our neighborhood, I hope you will sign up. We actually do have a website. And Mike, you can maybe send out the slides after that. You can click on the website and then you can join there and find out more about our organization. So thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations for starting a new community group. The only other announcement I have is we typically do our social the last Wednesday of the month, and we are going to decide whether we're going to do it on Wednesday, the last Wednesday, because it is also another one of Sunnyvale's downtown concerts. So stay tuned. And I do not have any other announcements. Anybody in the room? Nothing? No? All righty. Well, thank you for your time and for the information, and be well. Have a good night.